BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the Farming Today podcast with me, Charlotte Smith. In this episode, more money for Scottish farmers.
I'm pleased that we'll be providing over £668 million in support for agriculture, and we will also be returning some of the deferred ring-fence funding.
Well, in some ways, there's a sense of relief because our core support schemes have been effectively rolled over. However, it is somewhat disappointing that given the increase in the overall block grant that the Scottish Government received from the UK Government, that we haven't seen a slight uplift in the funding coming to agriculture.
More from the National Farmers Union Scotland and from the Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs in the Scottish Government later. Let's start, though, with our topic of the week, labour. Today, we're looking at the shortage of people in the fishing industry. The lack of people means some older skippers are now giving up early as they can't find a crew. No foreign workers are allowed to work on boats within 12 miles of the shore, so they can't plug the gap. And fishermen say it's harder to employ school leavers under 18 because of extra safety requirements. Well, one fisherman from Bridlington in Yorkshire, on the brink of selling his boat due to crew shortages, decided to fight back and use social media to promote the career. Sarah Falkingham went to meet him.
I've come to Bridlington Harbour, which is steeped in the tradition and history of fishing, and there are about 40 boats here. They're all connected with the shellfish industry. This is actually the lobster capital of Europe. They land over 300 tonnes of the crustaceans annually. And I'm off to see Carl and Jenny Price, who are down on their boat here. Isabella, how do I get down then, Carl?
Yeah, you have to just come down the ladders, a bit of a step at the bottom. So this is a 12-metre catamaran, which is purpose-built for static gear work. Fishing for crabs and lobsters seasonally. Got the first boat when I was about 23.
And you're out how many times a year?
We average around 180 days a year.
And how many crew have you got here?
We usually work this as a 4-man crew, 4 to a 5-man crew.
This place is steeped in history and tradition, but it will struggle if it doesn't get any more crew.
Yeah.
And you feel very strongly about that and started a social media campaign and a website with films, Get a Life at Sea, to show the realities of working. How difficult is it to get crew? How many of you had coming to test out if they like it?
Yeah, quite a few. The trouble is with this job, you don't know if you like it or not until you get in it, get yourself immersed in it. And some people can't get over the seasickness. I've took some people to see it, they've never even been seasick, it never even bothers them. But it's hard work, and it's hard physical work.
And your wife here, Jenny, you've gone into schools, both of you as well, to talk to pupils, students, show them what the life is like. What do you do? How do you try and pique their interest?
I always take a tank in with a live lobster and a crab and some other little sea creatures in it, and that generally gets all the kids to my table, and that's when I can start talking to them about fishing, about the industry that's in their hometown and how we need to recruit new people.
And have you had any success? Anybody come forward?
Yeah, I've had quite a few people message us saying, oh, this looks really interesting, what do I do? So I can point them in the direction of how to do their courses, what they need to do, and then they've gone on to do their courses and gone off to work at sea.
So, Carl, it's a very seasonal job. You'll be quiet in the winter now, mending. You'll get busier, and flat out in the summer with lobsters, which is where you make most of the money, and that's the gold rush, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
What could somebody earn, doing this job?
You're averaging anywhere at the bottom end of the scale from 20, 25, 35 grand a year, and you can go right up to the top end of the scale with some of the bigger earners. They're doing 45, maybe plus than that a year.
That's not bad for manual work, so it's not underpaid.
No.
What are the barriers, though, to getting people out here?
Red tape.
Yeah, before you're even allowed to even step on a boat, you have to go do a sea survival, and it's not free, it's about £180, and we'd like to maybe see that you could maybe take somebody without that, as long as under certain circumstances, just for, even if it's just half a day, to see if they like it before they go and do it, because they don't want to spend £180 doing a course for a job they might even hate. They then have to go and do some more courses if they stay in, which again, they're sort of £150, £200 a course. It's a lot of money before you even start earning any money. And then there's also the red tape and the health and safety around having young people on boats, which, as you can imagine, there's quite a lot of things that can be dangerous. There's a lot of safety's come a long way in fishing in the last 20 years, but there is still a lot of red tape regarding safety and taking people to sea, which can be a huge barrier.
Jenny Price. Tomorrow we'll be looking at seasonal workers picking fruit and veg here in the UK and concerns that it can be difficult for them to complain if things go wrong. MPs have voted in support of the government's change to inheritance tax on farms. In an opposition debate yesterday, the Conservatives proposed the tax be scrapped, but the motion was defeated. Well, as we've been reporting, this is an issue which has enraged many farmers who've held protests in London and around the country. They say it'll mean family farms will have to be sold when the older generation dies to meet the tax bill. The government says it's a fair way of raising much-needed money for public services. Ministers point out that the first £1 million will be exempt, and they argue that with other allowances, a couple would be able to pass on £3 million tax-free. They add that inheritance tax will be due at 20%, that's half the usual rate. Well, the Shadow Environment Secretary, Victoria Atkins, challenged Labour MPs representing rural areas to back farming families and vote against what she called a government which doesn't understand farming.
This government has driven farmers to despair. The hike in national insurance, the acceleration of delinked payments, the fertiliser tax, the double cab tax, the stalling of capital grants, the scrapping of the Rural Services Delivery Grant and the slowing down of applications to farming schemes are all conspiring against our rural economy and the survival of British farms. Yet they've added a death tax to this, the family farm tax.
Well, the Treasury Minister, James Murray, insisted the tax was fair and would raise much-needed funds. He repeatedly pointed to figures from HMRC on estates claiming tax relief, which he explained showed that most family farms won't be affected.
I don't know whether it's mischief or misunderstanding, but there is some focus on the total value of farms rather than on inheritance tax liabilities. It is inheritance tax liabilities which is the correct data to look at in evaluating the impact this policy may have. I'm going to make some progress because, as I said earlier, Madam Deputy Speaker, a farm worth £5 million but owned by 5 relatives in equal shares could have no inheritance tax liability.
Treasury Minister James Murray there, and I'm sure we'll be coming back to that issue soon. Farmers in Scotland have given a cautious welcome to the increase in the agriculture budget to £660 million. That's up from £620 million, but falls short of the £776 million that National Farmers Union in Scotland had wanted. The Finance Secretary also announced in the Scottish budget that the money taken from agriculture over the past few years will be returned in full over the next 2 years. Rural Affairs Cabinet Secretary in the SNP government, Marie Goujon, told me it's a good settlement.
Well, I think we've brought forward and introduced quite a strong settlement in the budget overall. And for agriculture, you'll be aware that we had a rally in front of the Scottish Parliament last week. And I was really keen to listen to what farmers and crofters across Scotland were telling us in relation to that. So I'm pleased that we'll be providing over £668 million in support for agriculture. And that includes the rollover of the £620 million of funding that had been baselined into the budget by the UK government. And we will also be returning some of the deferred ring-fence funding to the industry. So there was £46 million, which will be returned both this financial year and next.
It is less than farmers had wanted. As you'll know, they suggested £776 million. And conservationists too say you'll need to spend more than this to protect nature.
I would say that it's also important to highlight that there are other areas of the budget as well, not least in the net zero and climate portfolio. And there's a specific climate budget where there will be additional funds that are available to people precisely for that purpose as well as funds available for tree planting and peatland restoration. But we know that the support that we provide for our farmers and crofters is so vitally important. And that's where we'll be maintaining our commitment to direct payments, funding that, our less favoured area support scheme, as well as our voluntary coupled support. And I think it's, again, we've transferred that funding. We're making sure that's going right into farmers' pockets, quite rightly, as it should do. But I think it's also important to note that we're not setting a budget completely divorced from what's been set in the UK government budget. And we are impacted by choices that have been made there, and not least the decision to baseline that funding. And we are seriously concerned about some of the other implications that were made in the UK government's announcement of its budget. But we've maintained our commitment to supporting our farmers and crofters in Scotland by maintaining these hugely important payments.
As you say, £46 million that was taken away out of the budget is coming back to agriculture over the next 2 years as a grant scheme. How's that going to work?
Well, we're very keen to have discussions with our industry and with farmers and crofters about this fund. So we'll see £20 million returned this coming financial year for an agricultural transformation fund. But I mean, as an example, when I was at the rally last week, we were hearing different calls that about what we can do for our next generation and for new entrants into farming. We also know in relation to our food processing sector that there are calls for more funding there. So we're really keen that we get this money to where it needs to go and get it out in the best fashion possible. So that's where we really want to work with our industry on developing those funds.
Marie Goujon. Well, Johnny Hall, Policy Director of the National Farmers Union Scotland, says it could have been worse.
Well, in some ways, there's a sense of relief because our core support schemes, such as the Basic Payment Scheme, our Less Favoured Areas Support Scheme, etc., have been effectively rolled over. I appreciate that probably means a slight real terms decline, but we do have some certainty around those things for at least the next year, which is important. However, it is somewhat disappointing that given the increase in the overall block grant that Scottish Government received from the UK Government back on 30th of October, that we haven't seen a slight uplift in the funding coming to agriculture. What is important, though, however, is that the outstanding £46 million, which the Scottish Government deferred from capital spending, etc., in previous years, there's now a clear commitment to return that, and we'll be looking to work with Scottish Government as to how we can utilise that capital funding going forward. And in fact, since the budget, we have already met with Marie Goujon, our Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs.
And she seems to be thinking there that it'll be a grant scheme over the next 2 years to get that money back into agriculture.
That's our understanding, and that's our preference. We want to see that money going into investment, if that's the right expression, so that we're going to help build resilience, so our farming businesses can really adapt to challenging times ahead that we know will come. And the front runner's already out there in terms of the sorts of things we would like to see that money spent on, are things like new entrance grants, which we haven't run in Scotland for some time, things around water resource management. Despite all the rain we've had in recent times, we still do have these challenges in our fruit and veg growing areas and so on. And other things around, small-scale abattoirs and food processing and marketing grants, which will add value to the supply chain.
I think you've probably spent more than you're going to be getting back. It's 46 million over 2 years.
Probably, but, we'll have to work through that detail. Yes, 20 million in 25, 26, and the remaining 26 million coming thereafter. But I think we need to put in front of the Scottish Government a cast iron case as to why that capital investment is essential and how best it can be utilised. I mean, clearly there will be shopping lists, if you like, of demands on that funding. But nevertheless, I think we need to think carefully about how best to use it so we get the best return on that investment.
Johnny Hall from the National Farmers Union Scotland. That's about it from us. Do let us know your opinions on anything you've heard in today's programme. You can email us. We're farming.today@bbc.co.uk, or you could tweet us on X, where we are at BBC Farming Today. And if you're looking for a lovely slice of the outdoors on the radio later today, do listen to the second episode of our new series, This Natural Life. It's at 3:00 this afternoon here on BBC Radio 4. Martha Carney will be meeting the nature writer Richard Mabey on the Norfolk Broads to explore his fascination with the natural world. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Beatrice Fenton, and Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.